you everyone for being here today and for being willing to listen to what I have to say. So my name is Catarina Martins. I'm the Chief Sustainability and Technology Officer for MOWI. So I have these two roles, which basically means developing and implementing the sustainability strategy for MOWI. And also I lead a team of experts who do R&D and innovation work to support MOWI with our strategy moving forward. So I'm going to address sustainability as a key success factor for growth in aquaculture. I will indeed talk about MOWI, but I think the conversation today is actually bigger than MOWI. It is about blue foods. It is about aquatic foods. So, and that topic and that power of actually producing food from the ocean is so important that I would really love that everyone that is connected with aquaculture takes some of these key home messages back home. So this is not just about salmon farming. This is not just about MOWI. It's bigger than that. It's really about blue foods and the power that blue foods have to address some global challenges that we have, like climate change, for example, or food security. But I do want to start by introducing MOWI, first of all. So MOWI, in brief, we are one of the world's leading seafood companies. We are measured #1 in terms of market capitalization, and we are also the #1 on sustainability. Why do we say this? Because, and I will be showing you a graph soon, based on the Scholar Fair Protein Index, which is an investor-based rating on animal protein production. Aquaculture companies are really leading the way, and MOWI has actually been rated the most sustainable animal protein producer in the world for the last 4 years in a row. We are the world's largest producer of Atlantic salmon with the estimated production of almost 500,000 tons in 2023. And to make those numbers a bit more digestible, what does that mean is close to 2.7 billion meals per year. We are a fully integrated value chain. We are listed on the Oslo Stock Exchange, and we have our headquarters in Bergen, Norway. So when I say that MOWI is a fully vertically integrated company, what does that mean? MOWI itself is self-sufficient when it comes to feed production in Europe. So we produce our own feeds that goes into our European farming entities. And that means basically a factory in Norway and also a factory in Scotland. We have our breeding and genetics team, which do the fine-tuning of the breeding decisions. When it comes to resilience of health or disease resistance, for example, decisions, but also growth, etc. We also have the freshwater production in our smolt divisions, so both in flow-through systems, but also in RAS systems spread around the world, really. And then we have farming. We farm in several countries, which I will show you soon. That's really the bread and butter for what we do at MOWI. Although the upstream and downstream business of what we do is also quite important. So we do primary processing in the countries where we farm our salmon, but then we also have secondary processing plants located in strategic markets. So we do have secondary processing plants in the US, for example, in China, in Vietnam, so in several places around the world, which of course facilitates the access to these markets. And then finally, we have products and consumer. That basically means a global brand that we have launched in 2019 called MOWI, as you can see from that product there in capital letters. So when you see actually MOWI written in capital letters, we mean our global brand. And when you see MOWI written without capital letters, we mean the company. And this is quite an interesting journey for us, because that was an opportunity for us to communicate directly with the end consumer. And also not only to leverage, let's say, the brand, but also to promote the salmon category, which is quite an important strategy for us. So diving a little bit further into these 3 business areas, which is feed, farming, and sales and marketing. If we start with feed, Then, as you see, as I mentioned before, we have two feed plants, one in Valsenessa in Norway and one in Kyleakin in Scotland. These allow us a total production capacity of close to 640,000 tons. And it means that we are self-sufficient in Europe. So here it goes. In Europe, we farm foremost in Norway. That is the biggest salmon farming country we have, with 290,000 tons. And then we also farm in Scotland, 64,000 tons, in Faroes, 10,000 tons, Ireland, 5,000 tons. That's our organic production. And then most recently, we have purchased a company in Iceland, then adding 15,000 tons to this new farming country. And then in the Americas, we farm in Canada, both in the West Coast, in the Vancouver Island area, but also then in the East, the Atlantic side. Together, they make 28,000 tons. And then in Chile, quite an important farming country for us, with 72,000 tons. So moving to the third business area we have in terms of sales and marketing, you can see here the sales offices, but also the secondary processing plants. We have quite a large footprint here in the Americas, but also in Asia. And then, of course, you see there important countries like France and UK, where we have been actually launching already our MOWI brand. So this was about introducing MOWI. I want also to then touch upon the blue foods or the food from the ocean, which I think it's such a fantastic story really that we have behind our industry, and maybe we haven't been clever enough to communicate these key messages points in a good way. So if we start with the helicopter view, you have been hearing these numbers probably in other settings, and whenever we think about the ocean, these numbers are fantastic, right? It's 70% of the planet's surface is ocean. The ocean produces 50% of the planet's oxygen. It absorbs 93% of the world's anthropogenic heat. 90% of all internationally traded goods travel by ship, but yet only 2% of our caloric intake or 15% of protein intake comes from seafood. So despite the astonishing numbers that we have when it comes to the role of our oceans to control climate change, etc., when we relate the ocean with food production and with caloric intake, the numbers are actually quite low still. So there is a significant opportunity still if we think about the amount of water we have out there to produce and to increase that food from the oceans. And this goes quite well with global trends. We know that the population is growing, and not only the population is growing, but we know also that middle class is growing. We know also that we have an older aging population, meaning that everything that connects with food, which prevents cardiovascular diseases, which helps, for example, with preventing eyesight loss, for example, typical problems that we get with when we get older. There is a clear support from science that foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, that they can prevent these issues. So, and we know that we will get an older population as we move along. So not only that, but also the fact that we need more food that has a low carbon footprint. We know that climate change, compared with all the environmental challenges that we face today, climate is probably the single one that everyone is mostly connected with. We know biodiversity loss is another one coming at a very high pace now, but climate change is certainly one that is on top of mind of everyone, regulators, NGOs, us producers. And therefore, we know that whatever more food production we are to produce from this planet, that it needs to have a low carbon footprint. And in that space, blue foods have such a great advantage because indeed they have a low carbon footprint. If we think about fish in particular, then we have really biology helping us. We know that as contrary to what we see in mammals or ourselves humans, we have to spend a lot of energy to keep our body temperature constant, and that's not the case for fish. They are what is called ectotherms, so meaning that they don't need to spend energy to keep their body temperature, meaning that they can channel that energy actually for growth. And that is reflected in what we call the feed conversion ratios, the FCRs, being very low for most of the aquaculture species. And certainly for salmon, they are around 1.1, 1.2, which really supports in a very strong way the low environmental impact that seafood has. And the beauty of this is that it's not only us, the industry or the company talking about these kind of things. It's actually very heavily supported by science. And I want to give you 3 examples here. One comes from the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. The second one in the middle, it's the Blue Food Assessment. And then the Food Planet Health has actually been released by the Eat Lancet report a few years ago, presenting a concept which is called the planetary healthy diet concept. And I want to give you a few examples of each of these reports, which are supported by many scientific papers published in the highest scientific magazines that you can find out there. I've been a scientist myself for many years, and I have always had the ambition to publish papers in Nature, which have a huge impact factor. And all of these materials here, they have been published in Nature. So they have been heavily, let's say, scrutinized for quality, and they have been published. So meaning that the science behind it is very strong. So let's start with the ocean solutions that benefit people, nature, and the economy by the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. And what they have presented is how powerful economies from the ocean are in terms of fighting climate change. And as you can see here from the yellow bar, fisheries, aquaculture, and dietary shifts, they can contribute significantly to reduce the emission gap that we need if we are to achieve the Paris Agreement of keeping our world temperatures below 1.5 degrees. And that is quite significant. It comes second after for example, carbon storage in seabed. So there is a fantastic opportunity there in the space of blue foods to reduce really climate impact. But not only that, also from a financial perspective, what these studies have concluded is that the ocean-based food production have a benefit-cost ratio of 10:1, meaning that if today you would invest $1 in ocean-based food production, you would get $10 back in 2030. So this is quite significant as well from an investor's perspective and from the financial benefits that this industry has. So moving to the Blue Food Assessment that was released in 2021, it's actually very interesting because they have produced a number of papers connected with the nutritional value of blue foods, but also one was connected with the environmental impact of blue foods. And what I find particularly interesting is that it was compared with chicken, which is, you could say, the hardest one to beat, let's say, from an environmental impact assessment. If you are to compare any blue foods from an environmental impact assessment with beef, for example, that's a no-brainer, right? I think everyone is pretty much convinced that we do have a low carbon footprint, a lower freshwater use, a lower land use. But what about chicken, right? Because the chicken is not a mammal. So referring back to my FCR arguments and having to keep the body temperature constant. So with chicken is not the same thing. It's in a way closer to fish. But what actually this study has shown is that if you look, for example, to climate change, or if you look, for example, to land use, we could see that a lot of blue foods, including farmed salmon, for example, it's still lower than chicken. Yeah, so you can see the highlight there as the main conclusion from this study. Farmed salmon, trout, fed carps, catfish, and tilapia performed similarly or better than chicken, often considered the most efficient terrestrial animal across the environmental stressors like climate and land use and freshwater use. So that's quite relevant. It was also very obvious from a nutritional point of view that aquatic foods provide this unique micronutrients that can help secure healthy diets. So it's not only about the omega-3 fatty acids, but it's also about the micronutrients that are so difficult to get when you think about land animal proteins, but also when you think about vegetable proteins. Is very difficult to match what we can find in seafood, the combination of micronutrients, omega-3 proteins. It's quite unique what we have there from a nutritional point of view. And this is also the conclusion from the Eat Lancet report. The question there was, okay, we care very much about the nutritional profile of our diets, but what if a consumer wants to care about the planet as well? What should a person eat if they care about both their health, but also our planet? And this is when they have released this planetary health diet concept. And here the conclusion, as you can see, is the emphasized foods. Yeah, so food that you should it's encouraged to consume because it's good for you from a nutritional point of view, but it's also good for our planet. And you see vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, but also fish. And it's quite interesting in these discussions about, you know, vegetarianism and vegans, etc. From a consumer's perspective, often, you know, the fish side is left a little bit unforgotten there, or forgotten there. So that is such an important key message, I think, from this presentation, is that yes, fruits and vegetables are key, but so are fish. So let's not forget the blue foods as part of the solution here for being good for people and also good for the planet. This is also confirmed by the latest FAO report, the SOFIA report, and clearly an intensification of aquaculture is seen as part of the blue transformation. I don't need to go through the numbers that were presented in that report, but there's a clear importance there that blue foods will take, and the predictions are quite encouraged. Or encouraging, from actually 15% increase in aquatic food consumption to supply on average 21.4 kilos per capita in 2030, compared with 9.9 kilos in 1960. So there is really a significant increase in aquatic food consumption, which is expected to still continue over the next years. So this was the second point of my presentation that I wanted to convey. So blue foods, they have really an important role to play in the world. And I think this industry has shown an incredible ability to adapt and an incredible ability to innovate. So I want to show you three examples that kind of support with what I just said. One comes from the reduction dependency on marine feed raw materials. We have seen that the feed composition, and here I'm talking about salmon in particular, if we compare the feed composition from the 90s to what we see today, actually the salmon has become mostly vegetarian because it has significantly increased the percentage of plant raw materials that goes into those diets, and less of marine raw materials. And this is important because we know that fish meal and fish oil, they are very important feed raw materials. They are important for the health and welfare of our salmon, but we also know that there are limited amounts out there. So from a strategic point of view, there has been a lot of R&D going into this over the last decades, but we have come to a point now where we know we can actually be at the levels where we are today, which is still using around 15 to 20% of fish meal and fish oil, but we know also that we can increase the amounts of vegetable feed raw materials. This, of course, does not come without its own dilemmas, because by increasing the vegetable feed raw materials, we actually end up increasing the carbon footprint of the diets, because fish meal and fish oil, they do have a low carbon footprint as compared with vegetable feed raw materials. So another example that I want to say connects with escapes. We know that the industry in Norway has been able to grow significantly, despite the number of escape incidents have been reduced over time also significantly. And this is mainly connected with an increase in technical specifications of the equipments and Norwegian standards that really have helped making sure that the equipment that is out there is certified and is fit for purpose so that we don't end up having equipment failures because of weather conditions, for example. And the third example I want to give, which is really applauded by the World Health Organization as an example here in Norway, is the incredible story that we have on not being dependent on antibiotics because vaccines have been so effective. So vaccines, basically every smolt that goes out at sea is vaccinated. And as we can see here, this has allowed the industry to grow significantly in numbers and actually basically don't use almost any antibiotics for the Norwegian production. That is not the case everywhere yet, but work is ongoing when it comes to improving vaccines for other diseases that are relevant in other farming countries, like, for example, Chile. So jumping a little bit into sustainability strategy that we have for MOWI, we have called our strategy Leading the Blue Revolution Plan. It is clustered around three main pillars. One is being part of the solution to global challenges. Here we have specific targets connected with climate change, so reducing our scope 1 and 3 emissions. These targets, they are approved by the science-based targets, which is quite an important framework to align, let's say, our strategy. We also have targets on plastic. They refer both to farming plastic equipment. So we want to have by the end of this year already 100% of farming plastic equipment, which for us in scope now means nets and feeding pipes. They are reused or recycled. And then we have two targets connected with farming, with packaging. And these are by 2025, 100% of our farming packaging will be, plastic packaging will be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And also by 2025, at least 25% of plastic packaging should come from recycled plastic content. The second pillar of our strategy is called an eco-efficient value chain. Here we have targets like zero waste to landfill, and also in our processing plants that are located in areas of medium to high water scarcity, we have a specific target on a 10% reduction in water intensity in those processing plants. And for us, that basically means one plant in France and then two plants in Asia because they are located in water scarcity areas. And then we have the third pillar in our strategy, which is called In Harmony with Nature. And here we address sustainable certification. So we are aiming to have 100% of our yearly harvested volumes to be certified with the GSSI recognized standard. That means either ASC, BAP, or Global GAP. We also have a zero escape target, and 100% training of all our farming personnel runs yearly training programs. We have a sea lice target as well, 0% of sites above national limits. And we also have a mortality target, or maybe flipping it the other way around, the survival average monthly target of 99.5% by 2025. We continue to work on reducing our antibiotic use, and we are also working on real-time monitoring of welfare indicators. On sustainable feed, we aim for 100% of traceability, 100% of our marine raw materials being either marine trust, MSC, or equivalent in terms of certifications, 100% of soy being deforestation free, working towards lower FCRs and also towards lower carbon footprint when we source our feed raw materials. So how are we in this strategy? These are just a few highlights of this journey, which is quite significant. So we have managed so far to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 33% since 2019. And if we take scope 3 emissions, this would be a 10% reduction since 2019. We are at 99% of our harvest volumes being certified with either ASC, Global GAP, or BAP. 93% of our marine sites are what we call having a minimum benthic impact. So every country measures benthic impact following the regulatory frameworks, but we do collect all this data into this metric that we call a benthic impact. So that's actually very good, and only of the few sites that we have where we see some measure of benthic impact, then we take actions like, for example, reducing the production or reducing the amount of feed that we deliver on those sites. 100% compliant with our sustainable sourcing in terms of feed. 77% of plastic packaging is already recyclable, reused, or compostable. 95% of all the waste we have does not go to landfill in our processing plants. We are already a net protein producer because our fish in, fish out is lower than 1. And we only use 0.1% of fresh water in areas considered of medium to high water scarcity. So in this sustainability journey, transparency is key. And even if the numbers are not yet where they should be, we have learned by experience that it's better to be transparent about those ones and then work towards improving those numbers. We are transparent on those numbers in many different types of reports. If we go to MOWI.com sustainability, you will find a lot of information there. Our annual report compiles all our ESG metrics over the last 3 years, but we also have our quarterly financial reports, which has a planet section, for example, or a people section, where we report all these ESG metrics. So coming back to my starting point in a way about the sustainability of this industry, of course, there is a lot to be done and a lot of work to be done, but I think we should all be very proud of what we have achieved so far. And I come back to this rating, the FAIR rating, the Farmed Animal Investment Risks and Returns, which compares the 60 largest listed animal protein companies in the world. So, you know, MOWI and other aquaculture companies are being compared with the likes of Tyson, for example, you know, GBS. So large companies in the land animal protein space. And you can see here that the yellow category there, which is the low risk companies, they are all aquaculture companies. And I am pretty sure that not so many people know about this. So I think when you know the industry is being criticized, we should really leverage these arguments that, you know, it can't be that bad. Well, we must be doing something good in addition to all the arguments that I brought forward that the scientists are really, you know, highlighting as the importance of blue foods in this climate space. It's quite important key home messages for everyone. I encourage you to actually know this rating and to be able to, you know, communicate around this as well. So maybe considering time, I would like to spend a little bit on time in these 2 last slides here, and they connect about sustainable intensification and also about innovation. And these are a few examples of innovation that is happening around the value chain of MOWI, but you could take it, you know, in the aquaculture space, there are innovations happening not only, you know, in the seasides or in the freshwater production units, but also in feeds. There's a lot of R&D going into novel feed raw materials, for example, a lot of R&D going into, you know, optimizing the manufacturing of feed to get to better FCRs. There's a lot of R&D going into breeding and genetics as well in terms of quality of eggs, making sure that the information we get from the seawater performance is fed back into breeding and genetic decision goals, so that we make sure that the most resilient stock goes into the areas where it's most needed. So that's quite important as well. In freshwater, there's a lot of R&D going into real-time monitoring, for example, of water quality in HAS systems to make sure that we go more and more from a reactive type of management to a more proactive type of management, so that based on, you know, shifts in water quality, we are able to predict what is coming. And that is really becoming a reality, not only for the freshwater production, but also for the seawater production. We use a concept which is called smart farming. You can see here kind of the idea behind it is that instead of thinking that every site is managed alone, we are thinking about cluster of sites being fed autonomously with underwater, you know, cameras and feeding systems that talk together based on pellet detection and feeding behavior that actually allows a next level of automation and digitalization in the way we farm. So all these lines that you see together here, this is basically data, that is being collected by sensors, by cameras that then feed into what we call MOWI 4.0, that actually then allows to make decisions along the value chain. So for example, understanding also product quality at the end. So in our processing lines, we have scanners that measure product quality on the real time. And that gives us a lot of information. But what is mostly interesting then is start to understand, okay, how is that connected with the decisions that were done from the start, right? In terms of feed formulation, in terms of breeding and genetic decisions, how the smolts were raised in freshwater. So all of that is going to give us significant data insight to move this industry forward. And this is my last slide. So just to give you a few examples of what is happening at the net pens out there at sea, there's a lot of innovations going there in terms of underwater feeding, underwater lights, automatic robot cleaning on our nets, these underwater cameras that I told you about that are able to detect the biomass values, but also automatic sea lice counting, for example, or autonomous feeding. That's something that we are working quite hard, and I strongly believe that these will be the next steps when it comes to sustainable intensification of aquaculture. Thank you.